Hi Ben. So as promised, finals are over, and I am going to reply to that video that you had posted. For those that don't know me, my name is Joshua. I'm a friend of Ben's. We served in the military together, and I saw that he had posted um, somewhat of a viral video about by Joshua Feuerstein, where he goes through and demolishes evolutionary argument. But this guy's using the same old arguments that have been just disproven over and over and over again. Um, and I had told Ben, I had replied to Ben's post, and I said, do you want me to deconstruct this guy's argument piece by piece? And I was kind of being cheeky about it, but Ben actually seemed legitimately interested in what I had to say, and I appreciate that. So the whole point that I was trying to make, I wasn't necessarily bashing people with faith. I'm personally I'm an atheist, but what was really annoying and what is really frustrating about creationists making the arguments that Josh made is that they're just not founded in any kind of fact whatsoever. It's completely based off a misunderstanding, and I'm not going to sit here and say that you couldn't find some kind of cogent argument that you could sit down and have a debate with a creationist over. But I don't know what those arguments would be. But the ones that Josh Feuerstein used are just completely ridiculous. And my point to Ben was that when you use arguments like that, it just flaunts your ignorance and lends no credibility to what you're saying. And if you have no credibility, then you're not going to reach anybody who doesn't already agree with you. So if you want to argue creationism, go right ahead. I'm not going to judge you, but I would caution you to do some research first, so that you're not using these same points that Mr. Feuerstein does, that just completely flaunt your ignorance. So, to that note, I'm going to play some of his video, and then I'll reply, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, Josh Feuerstein here. The other day I had an atheist tell me that I was an idiot, moronic, and stupid for believing in God, that he created this world, because it took way too much faith to believe in a process like that, while he believed in what he called the science of evolution.
Okay, so first thing, he comes out of the gate hard charging, man. He says he had a conversation with an atheist, and he called me idiotic, moronic, and stupid. I don't know if this is like a legitimate conversation that he had with an atheist, or if he's just trying to, give some kind of exposition to kind of frame, the rant that he's about to go on. But it's obvious that he doesn't really want to have a discussion about it. He just wants to pontificate on his views, and he seems very aggressive about it, and that's not a way to start a discussion. That's a way to start an argument. So if you're going to argue for creationism, I would suggest that you not begin like that, but maybe a little nicer.
Well, let's go ahead and let's do this. Dear Mr. Atheist, first of all, let me correct you. Because evolution is not a science, never has, and never will be. Why? Because it cannot fit within the parameters and parentheses of science for one simple reason. It was never observed. That's why it's not science. That's why it's called the theory of evolution. One man's theory.
Okay, so this is one of the most frustrating things for anybody with a background in science, or has been educated in science and took that education seriously, or has taken the initiative to actually read and educate themselves. A theory in science is very well established paradigm that explains a body of information, a body of evidence, a body of observations. It's not a guess. It's not the common colloquial usage theory, like, oh, I have a theory about that, we'll see. It's not that at all. It's an explanation for how all of the results from experiments, all the data that you collect, all the natural observable uh, things are completely explained by the theory. That's what a theory is. To constantly say that it's just a theory and we should teach other theories along with it. Well, there is no other theory, because if there were other theories that also explained all of those phenomenon, um, you know, we wouldn't call those theories. There would be hypotheses, and we would still be testing them to see which one had more merit, um, until there was a consensus. Um, there's no guess. It's not one man's theory. It's science's theory. It's it's everybody's theory, and the arguments are over. There is no controversy on it. There's no debate about it. There's still some discussions and debates, and not necessarily controversy, but active areas of study as far as all the methods through which evolution occurs. We know natural selection is a method through which evolution occurs. There are thoughts that other methods are also responsible, and it's not one or the other. They work together. They work in tandem. But it's very well observed. To say that it's not a science because it's not observed, it's absolutely insane. It's a fallacy. Um, you know, Evolution's not just its own area of study. It explains observations and experimental data, and it's predictive in many, 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 many diverse fields. You can look at archaeology. You can look at biology, genetics, chemistry, biochemistry. All of these things um, make sense because of the theory of evolution. Um, in the fossil record, we see a particular hierarchy, and it's not of a stretch of the imagination to understand how things that are deeper in the rock layer were buried a lot longer ago than things at the top. Um, so when you consider how all of these things are buried and the features that we see in these fossils, and we see how species have diverged from one another, how they have gradually changed over time into new species. And then you take that data, all right, now let's set it aside for a second. Let's go to genetics. You see species A, and then you see species Z. In between there, you find species B, C, D, E, and F that have some similar characteristics, but different characteristics. And then when you add the genetics to that, you see that species A is more closely related, has more genes in common with species B than they do with species Z. And species Y has more genes in common with species Z than they do with species A. But they all share genes. We share genes with 98% of our genes we share with chimpanzees. We have 24% of our genes in common with grapes. Grapes to make wine. 24% of our genes are the same as the genes in grapes. 50% of our genes are the same as the genes in fruit flies. I don't think it's a stretch to say that, it would be, if you would accept the theory of evolution for a second, that we're more closely related to flies than to grapes. But it's true. We have 50% of our genes in common with fruit flies. It's more like 48, but I'm rounding. But yeah, theory of evolution set aside, it makes absolutely no sense why we would share 24% of our genes with grapes. But all life on Earth shares these commonalities, these features. Archaeology, genetics, the biochemistry, all of these things can all be combined and united and make sense under the theory of evolution. And all of those things are observations that you're denying in your statements exist, and that's ridiculous. It's again, it shows that you have absolutely no understanding. You can't you can't disagree with evolution if you don't know what evolution is. If If I say, there's absolutely no way that birds can fly, anybody that says birds flies are liars because birds don't even have wings. And then you find out that my understanding of a bird is that they are four-legged mammals with fur all over them, and people usually keep it as pets, and they wear collars and they do tricks for treats. Then you understand that I'm actually talking about dogs. I've lost all credibility. If you don't know what evolution is, how can you say that you don't believe in it? That makes no sense. Um, if your understanding of evolution is there was a ape that one day gave birth to a human being, and such human beings came into the earth, and that's what evolution says. No evolutionary biologist, no scientist, nobody with an education and an understanding in science would ever claim anything so ridiculous. We don't believe that happens. Evolution doesn't claim that. It doesn't explain that. That's not true. So to continue to use this argument is absolutely ridiculous. Evolution is small changes that occur in isolated populations over a span of thousands of years. There's little changes here and there in successive generations. If they impart an advantage, those genes are going to get passed on. And as changes accumulate, then slowly but surely you end up with a new species. I mean, I don't understand why that's so hard to comprehend. Um, think of it this way: if you picture like an old timey prisoner in a jail, and he's marking the days on the wall until he gets out of there, and day one he's in there and he puts a hash mark on the wall, and then day two he puts a hash mark on the wall. You go in there every single day, you really don't notice the changes. His mark on the wall, you might not even notice it. There's two marks on the wall, you still might not notice it. Now he's been in there for 10 years. There's 3,650 marks on the wall. You're going to notice that. It's a big difference. And that's how evolution works. Small little changes, one at a time, successively, over generations and generations and generations in isolated populations. And eventually, they can't mate anymore. They're not compatible anymore, and they're a different species. It's not insane. It's completely logical. It's predictable. Evolution explains all of these observations. There are plenty of them. There's an inexhaustible amount of examples. So, before you ever try to use this argument, you need to educate yourself so you don't use this argument. You just look foolish. Let me also add that, as far as theories go, let me just mention a few other theories, just to highlight what a theory is in science. There's the theory of general and special relativity, quantum theory, there's combustion theory, there's information theory. All of these things are vital. They are our understanding of certain phenomena, and are very explanatory. They explain all of the observations, all of the experimental data, and they're predictive. Without relativity, we don't have our satellites functioning. We don't have GPS. You're not getting from point A to point B. Using the Garmin without relativity. We couldn't keep the time frames proper. We couldn't observe the astronomical phenomena that we do. It's the whole foundation for astrophysics. The nature of relativity gave us the math and the tools to to discover black holes and quasars and pulsars. It's the foundation that we use for radio telescopes. It's completely opened up our understanding of the universe, an ability to expect things and then go look for them and then find them. That's the predictive power of a theory. Evolution's just as strong. It does that just as well. Quantum theory. Quantum theory is an explanation of how very small subatomic particles behave, and quantum theory has made amazing predictions on the nature of our universe. It's uncanny. It's beautiful. It's majestic. We had a cursory understanding. We had some observations that we didn't exactly know how to take. They developed the quantum theory. It explained all of these observations, and then they used the math developed in the quantum theory. And they said, given how much energy we see in the particles that we know about, we should find a particle of this size, but we don't have it. We don't see it. We don't know why it's not there. Enter the Large Hadron Collider, and they did an experiment. Lo and behold, they find a particle the exact size that they needed it to be with the energy that it needed to have, and that's the Higgs boson. I mean, that's the predictive power. That's the strength. That's the weight that a theory carries. It does all of those things. So to say that evolution is just a theory and has no observations, it's just as ridiculous as saying relativity is just a theory and has no observations. It's just as ridiculous as saying that quantum theory has no observations and is just a theory. And it's you just got to stop. It just shows you have absolutely no concept of scientific principles that you disagree with. How can you disagree with something that you don't understand? It makes absolutely no sense.
Now, I realize that you say that evolution is in science. And yet, if we go back to science, the one thing that science demands, maybe you've heard of something called the law of thermodynamics, which means that chaos can never produce order. Look at the world that we live in. The sun goes up, the moon comes out, we travel around the sun, we have years, we have days, we have seasons, the tide comes in and out. Everything works like a clock. It has order. And yet, you cannot argue that a world that has order came out of an accident because it defies the very logic and laws of science.
All right, so yes, I have heard of the law of thermodynamics, and unlike you, I've more than heard of it. I've actually studied it. I did take physics; it was required in my undergraduate. So yeah, I've heard of it. And as your other arguments, you have a complete misunderstanding of what the law of thermodynamics says. It doesn't say that chaos cannot create order. It says that that the entire universe is constantly moving towards an increased state of disorder. More specifically, what it's saying is that the amount of energy that cannot be used to do any work is constantly increasing or staying the same. That it's never getting larger. That it's never getting smaller. Meaning that we're not creating energy that is available to do work. I'm sorry if that's a little over your head, but basically, let me put it this way. So, if I take a piece of ice and I put it in a hot cup of coffee, the ice is going to melt. That seems obvious. And the coffee is going to cool down. So that is increasing entropy of the system. That is increasing the amount of energy that is no longer available to do any work, because energy has been spent by the hot coffee onto the ice cube to melt it, and we can't recapture that energy and use it for any work. So when creationists use this argument against evolution, it's obvious right off the bat that they have a complete misunderstanding of the law of thermodynamics, because to say that it prevents order from ever being created, you wouldn't be able to make that ice in your freezer. What it says is that if we're using energy to build things, that's more than okay. Because when you add up all of the energy that's going into things to make them more complex, to build things, more energy is wasted, is lost, ultimately, than is put into that system. So biological systems, just think of the foods you eat. We eat foods, and the chemical bonds in those foods, our body breaks down, and we use electrons in those bonds. We shuffle those around through some enzymatic machinery, to make a molecule called ATP that we use for energy. And it's a constant process. We're doing it as we speak. The energy that we get obviously comes from plants and animals and those things that produce our foods. But the energy to build those bonds that we break down is provided by the sun. So if you're just looking at the earth and biological systems on it, then it might seem magical that we can create all this order. We can build all these molecules and these complex structures. But it doesn't violate the law of thermodynamics because there's energy input. We have input energy from the sun. And as we break down those fuels, we're releasing all of that energy. And that excess energy, in the process of us using those fuels as fuel is generating heat. That's why you sweat when you work out. You increase the amount that your body metabolizes those fuels. And we don't capture all of that 100% as energy that we can use. A large portion of that is lost to heat. That's why your combustion engines in your cars get hot. It's energy being lost to heat. That's why when you burn firewood, it gets hot. It's energy lost to heat. And if you add up all of the energy going into a system and measure all of the energy that is eventually lost in that system, it's going to be equal. And that's what the law of thermodynamics states. Back to the refrigerator reference, when you put that water in the freezer, it's not a magical process. It requires energy, and we get that energy by plugging the refrigerator into the wall and that refrigerator's compressor motor running to cool off the temperature inside of the freezer. And that's not a magical process that we attribute to God, but it's completely analogous to where all of our energy comes from to build all the molecules in our body to support life. Ultimately, living things die and they break back down, and all of that energy that we spent, building this body goes back. It increases the entropy of the universe. It's completely explainable and well within. I've done calculations in entropy with biological systems, and I tell you what, every single time it worked out correctly. And if it worked out that it violated the law of thermodynamics, I lost some points on the test because I didn't do the calculations right. So it's a complete misunderstanding and a bastardization of the law of thermodynamics, specifically the second law is what he's quoting. But yeah, it's completely viable. It doesn't violate the law of thermodynamics at all. Nothing that we know of does. It's a worthless argument. It's a complete moot point. And again, all it does is either serve to show your ignorance and highlight that you don't know what you're talking about. And if you're using it as evidence for why you don't believe something, then it just shows that you're just trying to solidify your own understanding of something and look for things to back that up without actually giving it any ounce of critical thought or doing any investigation. It's a shame too, because you spot this stuff off, and people with less of an understanding of it than they should have might not go and discover it for themselves. And I firmly believe that as we turn children away from science like this, and when these people affect our policies, that we're losing great scientists that could have the next great discovery, win the next Nobel Prize, contribute amazing things to society. But I digress. You got to stop that argument, because it just highlights that you have no idea what you're talking about.
You see, you think it takes a lot of faith for me to believe in a God that created this world, a God that created order, and yet, what if I were to tell you that somewhere in Oklahoma, a tornado rolls through a junkyard full of a bunch of old cars, and somewhere on the other side of that tornado, out of that junk pile, it magically produces a perfectly red, shiny, working Lamborghini? You would tell me I was nuts. You would tell me that I had lost it. You would probably try to admit me into the psychiatric ward. Why? Because that is absolutely stupid. I mean, how much faith would it really take to believe something as idiotic as that? And yet that's exactly what science believes.
Well, so you said something I finally do agree with. I do believe that you have to have faith to believe in creationism. You know, faith is required for something that has no evidence, or you have no reason to believe it. And that's like kind of the cornerstone of the creationist account. Science doesn't require faith, so the fact that I have no faith in my science doesn't that doesn't really mean anything. We don't need faith; it doesn't require it. We have evidence. Again, a simple Google search would let you know that science requires, observations, testable hypotheses, that it requires, supportive data and predictability, and all of those things I've already discussed, how they're plentiful throughout evolution. And as far as your argument for the Lamborghini, there's not a scientist in the world that would claim that's probable or possible or likely. And to say that science believes that that would happen, and magically a Lamborghini would come out the other end, that's kind of whimsical, because for creationists to claim that science requires something to magically happen is kind of funny, when that's exactly the opposite of what we believe. But it is, in fact, an explanation for the creationist account that there's a supernatural being that waved a wand and created the entire universe. So I don't exactly understand where he was going with that argument. Even if science did believe that, and that was our account of things, I don't see how that would, in that case, be any different than the creationist account. So I'm not exactly sure where he's going with that. But I believe what he was trying to say is that scientists, in his understanding of evolution, assume that at one point there was no life, and then there was life, and it was complex. And that's, again, just highlighting how little he knows about evolution. Because we're not claiming that it magically got whipped together, and all the ingredients that we see today in a cell were present in the first cells. There's absolutely no basis of fact in that. There's no assumption of that. The beauty of evolution and the Darwinian theory is that it's very simple, and it has the power to explain and predict all these natural processes. And that's required by a theory. We're very open that we don't know how life, began, what that first cell was like, or what the first biologically active molecules were. We have an idea of how we believe it went. We have some experimental data that is a good start, that's currently being tested and is holding up scrutiny. But we don't even have a firm definition on what we would consider the first, appearance of life. Was it the first molecules that were active and that we would consider to be, organic molecules? Is that life? Is it the first time that they were enveloped in a membrane and were separated from the environment? What exactly is that threshold? I don't even know if that's been, really defined yet. But no scientist or evolutionary scientist is claiming that the first cell was this amazingly complex thing like we see today. It's just not what we think. And so to claim that's what we think, just, again, highlights that you don't know anything about evolution. And the fact that you disagree with evolution so passionately is interesting, since you don't even understand what evolution is. We do know that the chemistry that underlies biological processes occur naturally. We have seen that there are 10 naturally occurring amino acids. We've found evidence that those amino acids existed on asteroids that predate the Earth. It's completely possible that those amino acids were transported here on a comet or on an asteroid. I mean, that's completely viable. But these things actually happen. These organic molecules can be created in a lab simulating the early conditions of the Earth, and the there's only 20 amino acids that your body uses to build all the proteins that make up a human body. Plants, animals. They have some other ones that we don't use, but in humans, 20 amino acids, 10 of them naturally occurring. Uh, they freely form in the conditions of the early Earth. So that's just chemistry. That's just simple chemistry. We've experimented. We've found that in the lab. It's repeatable. It's consistent. Um, so those are the startings of life. It's not that we think a cell just popped into existence and it had all the complexity that we see in single-celled organisms today. It's just not the case. But experimentally, it's been shown that these 10 amino acids, they'll combine and form a small peptide, and that this peptide folds and takes on different shapes. And if you were to do any kind of uh, education in biology or chemistry, you would see that proteins and the way that they fold and the shapes that they take is the entire basis for our biological systems. That's what enzymes are. It's what our proteins are. Like the collagen in your skin, those are proteins folded in a particular way that they behave in a certain manner, and they function the way they do to allow your life to proceed. So yeah, I mean, it's not a huge leap of faith. We don't require faith. We have evidence. There's no faith involved. We're curious about these things. We evaluate to see, the conditions that were around at the time and the ingredients that were there at the time. And we put those ingredients into an experiment. And we see what happens, and lo and behold, the chemistry is the chemistry. It is what it is, and here we are.
Science believes that in this accident came this perfectly working earth with human life and with people and animals and plants and seasons and days and hours and rotates. I mean, the atmosphere, everything in earth was created perfectly. And I'm telling you, that could never happen through an accident. It had to be by intelligent design.
So again, scientists just don't believe that. We don't believe that there was an accident and then everything was perfectly created, and there we go. Um, the universe came into existence, and the laws that govern the universe were amenable to create the situations that planets formed, stars formed. Um, Conditions were right on Earth and probably elsewhere that these biological molecules formed and created life, and things proceed the way they did. We don't approach it as an endpoint with a purpose, and through lucky accident, it just worked out that we made it. It it's more of a just kind of the conditions were such that this was a consequence of those conditions. When it rains, it gets wet. Why is it wet? It's not wet because there was a predestined decision to get wet, and luckily it just happened to rain. It's wet because it rained. I mean, you know, the laws that govern our universe are what they are, and those laws allowed planets to form and stars to form. So when the planets and stars form, in the Earth's case, we happen to be at a good distance that it created a situation where it was warm enough to support processes that led to life being amenable on the planet. And it's not magical, and it doesn't require faith in a creator if you don't view it from the standpoint of it was destined to be, and we just had to work out a way to get here. It's more of a result. It's not a goal, as it were. And further, even again, even if science believed all those things that you think science believes, um, if if it came to the point that was proven wrong, it wouldn't necessarily support any other position. Um, that's a huge bait and switch with the creation argument that is somewhat frustrating. If uh, if you have uh, two competing ideas, uh, and not talking about creation and evolution, just in general, if you have two competing ideas and you disprove one of the ideas, it doesn't mean the other idea is true because the other one was false. You know, if uh, a layman's example, if I think if I think a girl likes me and she doesn't mean that she likes somebody else. It means that she doesn't like me. So, taking that to the evolutionary, uh, creationist argument, if evolution proves to be not true, that wouldn't by default make creationism true. I mean, then that doesn't make any sense. If you need evolution to be false for creationism to be true, I get that because evolution says that creation can't happen, but it doesn't lend any support for making creationism true. It could very well be some other process that more adequately explains all of the observations in the data, whereas creationism doesn't support any of the explanations or data. Uh, if you wanted to prove creationism or garner enough support for it, you would need to find observations and data and a predictive ability and experimental evidence that shows that it holds merit. Negating the merit of one idea doesn't support another idea unless that idea has its own merit. And just trying to disprove evolution isn't going to provide merit to creationism. It has no bearing on any of the evidence for creationism because there isn't any.
So, dear Mr. Atheist, who really has to have a lot of faith today to believe in their theory? I believe in God because I've experienced Him, I've felt Him, but most of all, while driving through Yellowstone and Montana and so many of these natural reserves this week and looking at animals and looking at life, I don't know. I just can't look at all of that creation and say that it was an accident. I have to say that creation has a creator.
So again, you have to have a lot of faith to believe what you believe. Science doesn't require any faith. We have evidence. We evaluate the evidence, and we come up with explanations for that evidence. All the natural processes that we observe, all the experimental data, all the historical data from many fields. We incorporate all that. We gain an understanding of it. We define an explanatory model, and if it fits, it's a theory. And this theory's been going strong since 1880. It's remarkable. It's inspiring. It's amazing. So yeah, you have to have your faith to believe what you believe. We don't have to have faith to believe what we believe. It's not required. We have the evidence. And just to highlight, you say that your evidence, the only evidence that you provided throughout the entire diatribe on creationism versus evolution was that it's to be true because you felt it, you've experienced it. That's not data. That's personal opinion. Schizophrenics experience voices and visual hallucinations. It doesn't make them true. I'm not saying that you're hallucinating, but what I'm saying is just because you personally experience doesn't make it true. That's not evidence. People personally experience things much differently than other individuals. It's not an argument. It's a belief, and it's a faith. So to answer your question, you require the faith. Science does not require the faith. Am I not a human being because I don't experience God? Because I don't believe in God. I don't believe in a supernatural power. Does that make me not a human? No. Because you experience those things, does that make creationism true? No. It gives you cause and reason enough in your mind to believe it, and you're more entitled to your beliefs. You're completely entitled to your beliefs. I don't see a problem with that. But to use those beliefs as an impetus behind trying to dissuade others from critically thinking and looking at the data and forming their own opinions and basing those opinions off of the actual truth of the matter is abhorrent in my opinion. If you're so confident and you're so 100% sure that your beliefs are true, then you shouldn't feel threatened at all by evolution, and you would actually take the time to go investigate it and realize that all of these things that you think you understand, you don't, and all of these definitions that you give are incorrect, and that all of your examples absolutely hold no weight because they're not based in fact or any kind of understanding of any of the laws or scientific principles or theories that you're discussing here and are so keen on disproving. If I wanted to disprove something, I would make sure I had a good understanding of it first. Number one, to make sure that I disagreed with it. And number two, to make sure I had the ammunition to be able to provide a coherent argument on level ground with people that are educated in it and believe in it. So that's my advice if you want to argue for creationism. Make sure you don't use these arguments, and whatever arguments you're going to use, make sure you understand them and you understand why your opponents will believe what they believe and how they understand the things that you're arguing, or you can't mount an argument against it.
And one final thought. Well, the word universe, you believe in a Big Bang, but when I look at the word universe, it means una, which is one or singular. That's Latin, una verse. Verse means a spoken statement. So universe is one single spoken statement. I dare you to read Genesis 1. And in the beginning, God said, let there be. All God had to do was speak one single spoken statement, and boom, the universe.
So he had to sneak one last mistake in there at the end. It was very poetic, and when given to a not critical thinker or somebody that just accepts whatever he's saying is true, that's a very beautiful, very poignant ending. I mean, it's poetic. It's emotional. It's good. Unfortunately, it's incorrect. He was correct. It does derive from Latin, and uni does mean one. But the verse part, Sorm, it does not mean spoken verse. It means to turn, like in verse, to turn in verse, like a verse of a song. It's one section, and verses are repeated. Yeah, and it was contracted together to mean that which turns together, as in the universe is a rotating single body. And again, just goes to highlight that he has no interest whatsoever in learning any kind of truth or verifying anything. He hears something, he likes the way it sounds, he believes it, and then he passes it off as fact to other people and just spreads ignorance. And, again, that's a shame. It's a passion for me to learn, to always be learning. And I think, there's not enough of that. People, and that's one of my biggest, probably critiques of people who push a hardcore line like this, is that they'll take something as truth like this and provide no critical thinking or desire to verify or to expand their knowledge on it whatsoever. They just take it as fact and then push other people to believe it. And that's to me, it's not a good way to go. And then he dares atheists to read Genesis. I've read the Bible. Every atheist I know has read the Bible. It wasn't that we were born with an inherent need to hate God or we have a gripe with God. It's nothing like that. It's quite the opposite. We just don't believe. Everybody's an atheist. You know, Christians are atheists. They don't believe in the same God as the Romans. They don't believe the same God as the Greeks. You know, they don't think Zeus is a god. They don't think Thor is a god. They don't think Athena is a goddess. They don't think Ra is a god. You know, it's a famous quote, but I love it. Atheists are just like everybody else. They just go one god further. Um, you know, there are plenty of gods throughout history. Every single person, unless they believe in every single god, is an atheist. Um, but the thing about all the atheists I know anyway, and all the educated scientists that actively, debate and seek to protect education policies and kind of fight the fight on the front of the creationism evolutionary battle. Every single one of them have read extensively, more than just Christianity. They've read the Bible, they've read the Quran, they've read the Torah. Uh, I've read these books. We A big thing that separates us from the hardline creationists like Josh Feuerstein is that we want to evaluate data. That's why we believe in evolution. That's why we believe in these scientific principles. We like to evaluate data and make decisions based off of the facts. And so you don't have to dare us to read Genesis. I guarantee you, if you know any atheists, most likely they've probably read the good book. They've probably researched religion. They've probably talked to pastors. They've probably talked to priests, the ministers. You know, they're well armed. They understand what they're talking about. They can quote the Bible. They can quote scripture, and probably beyond that, they understand. At least in my case, and the atheists I know, they can discuss historical context when those texts were written. They really have done a critical investigation into these things to form the beliefs that they have. So yeah, to sum up, not a single shred uh, of evidence for why evolution is false that this guy gave has any bearing in fact or reality whatsoever. It's all misconstrued definitions. It's misunderstanding of principles. It's nonsense. So again, the point being to not bash people of faith or to pick apart why I believe creationism is not a true account and is quite impossible. Um, it's not that. It's the frustration that stems from hearing these same arguments over and over and over and over again when they're just completely not founded in fact. So if you want to argue for creationism, you would be wise to stay away from these points because they're utter nonsense. So take care. I hope this was informative, and if you hate me, that's fine. I would appreciate you not blowing up my Facebook or Ben's. I'm not stating that he believes one way or the other, but I am encouraged that he is, looking for facts, looking for different beliefs, and trying to gain an understanding of the topic on a whole. So, congratulations, Ben. I hope this helped.